I want to catch you mid-bite, mid-gulp. I think that would be good. I don't edit out any of that stuff. I think it would be because I want the people to yell at you in the comments for eating on a podcast.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, Jordan, rookie draft season is a couple weeks from kicking off. You know how it goes. Like the real NFL draft happens, and then all of a sudden, the 30, 40, 25 leagues that you're in, it's like pick. It's hard to manage. So what I want to do today for everyone, Jordan McNamara, is just go back to some basics, some tactics, some strategy while we're in our rookie draft, some tricks, if you will. Not necessarily player takes, which we could do a couple of those, which, inevitably. But I always think that draft strategy while you're on the clock, all these things is a very good thing to review because this is how mistakes are made with your league mates and how you could take advantage.
Yeah, I love it. And I think going into these things with a strategy is a big boost to your odds, right? And, I think so many people spend so much time this time of the year just reviewing prospects and, reviewing tape and doing the whole Dynasty calendar that I think that sometimes we get lost and I think that creates a couple of problems. Number one, you lose sight of the forest when you're looking directly at the tree. So I saw someone today saying, I like 30 receivers in this class. I should trade my veterans. Like, we know that's a bad idea. Right.
I mean, right there, that just goes against you especially, because I know you well at this point, and that just goes against every principle that you hold dear in this beautiful game of Dynasty.
Well, yeah. And I see that. And when you spend a third of your year focused on rookies, of course you're going to think that way. Right. And so I would just be careful about making those things. And so I come at it from a strategic perspective, hey, we can look at and we can see historically, what do these guys do? Right? What are the hit rates of day 2 wide receivers? They're not good, right? What does that tell us about what we should be doing, right? And so I think a lot of that come at it with that way. And so again, having a strategy, and again, be careful that you're not sort of compounding, double counting rookies because you spent all your time doing it.
Yeah, I have had to, and by the way, we've all been guilty of this. That's how we figure it out, right? I mean, just the key is not to repeat them, or else you end up with a roster full of David Bells and Cedric Tillmans and
Brian Edwards, and just keep going. I mean, we could do we got an hour, Alan. We could do a whole hour on just day 2 wide receivers who people lost their mind over, and who didn't amount to much in the NFL. Right. And it's a classic. There's day 1 wide receivers that happens too. Right. Sky Moore. I mean, keep going down the list of day 2 wide receivers that we think we know at this time of the year, and that turn out we don't know much about anything. Right. And so I would be very, very careful about making those grand assumptions about your knowledge on these things, because the history is that's not true.
See, this is exactly why I want to go over this, because you could have this process. I have, I've adopted your philosophy on this. It's like a religious experience, the last couple of years listening to you talk about this stuff. But then, what happens? Puka Nacua happens and Tank Dell happens. And I'm only seeing the upside again. So, I mean, does Puka and Tank Dell, the success that they've had, change your process at all? Or at least how do you tell your subscribers over at Analytics at Dynasty, don't be distracted by the shiny lights over there?
So there is no rigorous or replicable analysis that would come to the conclusion that Puka Nacua is a top 5 wide receiver. There is none, because there was no case for it. Right. You can't even, people ask me about Trey McBride and these people where I'm you could tell me anything could happen. Right. You couldn't tell me that on Puka Nacua. There wasn't a stat you could look at coming into college. He didn't run, 4.23. None of that happened.
It was all the opposite.
It was all the opposite. He looked extremely ordinary. Right. He looked very, very, very average across the board.
Yeah.
And so the lesson I take from that is not you should spend all this time and energy and effort to try and figure out who that is. My approach to that is you should figure out all the time and energy and effort to stockpile resources for when that person reveals himself that you buy high. Right. So, and the way I think, I just did this week where I have 209, and instead of trying to go hunt Puka, right, the next Puka Nakua, which by the way, I'm not going to hit on at 209. Like the odds would tell me that that's like Puka Nakua occurring is like a 1 or 2% shot. Right. So that might, and again, I'm at the late second round, I have a better odds than that, but of a truly dynamic player, like it's not that likely. So if I traded 209 for a future second and a future fourth, and my thought is there will be someone, if there is someone that comes in and is like a third or fourth round rookie pick that all of a sudden goes Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams wasn't a rookie, but that in week 2, all of a sudden we see, he's a 90% snap share guy. Like that happened quick, right? By week 3, he's playing every down, right? Or with Puka Nakua, like the training camp reports, I went back and looked at them at Football Guys. They didn't mention anything like this in like week 4 of the preseason, right? So like it's revisionist history to think that you can actually predict what happened. But after week 2, you should have seen it, right? And the thing that I regret was not buying high. My biggest regret of all of last year was not buying high in Kyren Williams when he was hurt. That's the biggest regret that I had all last season, right? That's the biggest mistake that I made. And so I have changed not to try and hunt those guys, because Kyren Williams is the exact same way, by the way. Like he's extremely ordinary, right? There's nothing exceptional about his profile that we would see from the outside. Now, I think that there might be non-public data that would suggest otherwise, right? I think that there's probably stuff that teams know about these players, specifically the Rams and GPS data, that we just don't have access to, right? I think that that's part of it, but I don't know, because we don't know that information. That's just my suspicion.
I like what you said. I want to rewind and underline something you said, buy high. You don't often hear that, right? I mean, it's buying when there's uncertainty. It's when Bitcoin drops, from 20,000 a couple years ago to back to 7,000. You bought it at 18 and buying more, right? It's running into the burning building. And I think that's something it's easy to say now, right? Like everyone, right? Like when you look at the Houston wide receivers now, everyone thinks that, for example, that Nico Collins might be overvalued. But what happens, just using an insert player here, right? And then what happens when Nico has 2 big weeks, an 8 for 80 and a touchdown, a 6 for 120 and a touchdown? Are you then that, made up person? Are you going to then sell then, right? Because that's selling high if you really want to sell high. And then same thing with Puka last year. I remember, you heard Dynasty analysis. And by the way, it wasn't like crazy to say, hey, just any second round pick, get rid of them. Right. Then it was
100%.
Right.
It was like stock. It was like they handed that out at the Dynasty Podcasters Union Association.
Yep.
They had like cards.
Yep. This is the process bros. That's what I call them, the process bros. And what happens is process is great, but sometimes it's understanding what's happening when it doesn't fit the process. Oh, I'll be right more than I'm wrong. But wait, when you're wrong, it's catastrophic. It's like driverless cars, right? They're safer but when they get into an accident, it's completely catastrophic, right? So you have to realize when there is an exception. Then it was sell for any first. So I like that you pointed out Puka, and I like that you pointed out Kyren Williams. As we're talking,
can I just hit, like, I do think this isn't go out and buy every player that's performing well. Like that's not this. What fundamentally changed about both of those players is that they became and were given opportunities and performed in opportunities that far exceeded any reasonable expectation we had in August, right? No one thought that Kyren Williams would be a 90% snap share guy. No one thought that Puka Nakua would be a 30% target rate guy. No one thought those things, right? Because they were so unlikely, and then they happened, right? So I think that the lesson isn't to go out and you see this like Travis Fulgham. I'm old now. I've become old because we've been doing this a while, and now I reference people that know who they're talking about. But
Fulgham's is legendary,
like a
fantasy.
1 or 2 week hit guy, right? But if you looked at his stats, like they weren't that big. They just were like it just happened in like a 2 week span, right? Like his stats weren't that great, his underlying stats, right? But you look at what Puka Nacua did, right? This kind of harkens back to what Amon-Ra St. Brown did in like the second half of his rookie season. Like when you see people do elite things like 27, 28, 29% target rate stuff, north of 2.5 yards per route run. That stuff you can't fake, right? It's almost impossible to fake those numbers. And so when you see them happen for, again, a couple of weeks and then everyone's out, like the incentive in that situation, right? People don't want to have Puka Nacua happen for 2 weeks, him be worth, they spent 408 on him be worth a second, and then go back to zero, right? Like people don't want to lose that gain, right?
Right. That unrealized gain. Like it was good on paper. They had the gain on paper.
Right. But what happens in that situation is that's not Puka Nacua performing to a second round rookie pick valuation. He's actually worth more than that, right? Like you're buying him high, but you're not buying him at the peak. You're buying him on the way up. You're buying him higher, right? Not at the peak is kind of my thought with those second round rookie picks. Like a second round rookie pick is a non-top 100 startup pick, right? Like that's outside the top 100 in startup drafts. And so if you're trading that for a guy like that, should be exactly the type of investment you make, because when you see someone like Puka Nacua do elite things early, right? It happened in the first 2 or 3 weeks. Everyone was saying get out for a second. My biggest regret is that I didn't have enough seconds to give, right? Like between those two guys, like I learned more lessons from those two guys. Every year there's a couple of guys that change my strategy in terms of like trying to think about like what did I miss and how can I sort of do it better. Those two guys have changed the way that I think about rookies, not to try and hit on them more, but to try and be in the position where, again, the median points scored for day 3 wide receivers last year was 2.2 points.
Jesus Christ. That's fantasy points, right?
Points per game. Points per game. 2.2 points. So if you're going into those waters thinking I can get that right, by the way, Puka Nacua wasn't the first guy drafted, right? It never is. It has the only time this has happened in the past like 10 years where a guy, the market actually picked right on a guy was Tampa Bay Mike Williams as being the first day 3 wide receiver off the board. It's being the best one of his class. Like it almost never happens. And so it may happen, right? There's a 5% chance that it does happen, but you're just drawing randomly on those things. And so, but when they do reveal themselves in ways that are outside of the true expectation, right, that really change their reality before the market catches up, like those are opportunities.
Yep. You said something a moment ago that I think should be basically another one of our tactics, our sneaky tricks, as I titled the podcast in your dynasty draft, and that's acquiring draft picks. Now I know that's like sounds like vanilla ice cream advice, but it's not acquiring draft picks to use them on rookie players. It's acquiring them, rolling them back into years. Like if you're on the clock at 2.6 and there's a hyped player that's there that fell, right? Like maybe some tight end or a Marvin Mims from last year is not making that pick, rolling it back to another year, so you have ammunition in your holster for when Puka's there and the guy wants 2 seconds. Now you have 2 seconds next year, which got you to ultimately, that difference maker, that nuclear explosion. So I think that is important. You said it, but I want to firmly put it as part of our sneaky tricks, are acquiring draft picks, not to make the picks, but to acquire something, to use them in season on veterans.
Yeah, I love it. That's the way that I'm thinking about it. And especially in Superflex Dynasty, for example, I spend my entire existence thinking about how I'm going to get elite players. Like that's all I think about, right? Like And people criticize, like, it's funny. I'll get reviews or, people send in messages or people say, I don't like your podcast because all you do is talk about the top players. I was like, that's because that's what we think about, right? Because that's what wins, right? Like of course, that's what I'm talking about. Of course, that's what I'm thinking about because those guys matter so much. Like the difference between wide receiver 50 and 52 doesn't matter, right? Like
Hey, Jordan, you didn't do a podcast on the Jerry Jeudy to the Cleveland Browns. You didn't spend a lot of time on that.
I did. It was a very minimal part. Like I think I mentioned it. I mean, I do a podcast every day, so I have to talk about it a little bit. But like, there's a big focus on the elite players because they're the ones that tilt the league, right? They're the ones that matter. And so I think like anytime. Right. I sort of look at all of these things and think, okay, well, how does that fit into me getting a top 30 guy? And like the Puka Nacua one's a really good example because if Puka Nacua does that for 6 weeks, right, does this extremely elite thing for 2 weeks, is he capable of that for an entire season? Is this just a flash in the pan? It's unlikely it's a flash in the pan, but how do I sort of think about that? Well, at a second round rookie pick cost, like, if he does that for a couple months, he's a top 30 guy, right? So like, that's the way, like, I think you have to be early on that stuff at non-premium costs. And like, that's the lesson that I've learned. That's the lesson that I learned from Puka Nacua. Not that you can find him because if you go back and look, I don't think there was public data to suggest that Puka Nacua was like a top 5 guy in the league last year. I don't think that was predictable.
Yeah, I don't want to spend. Okay, so, and again, I don't want to make this the Puka Nacua podcast, but I do have one more Puka Nacua question for you.
Did you see him wearing a Cooper Kupp shirt, by the way, the other day?
Yes, I did.
That was the best part of the offseason. He was Cooper Kupp was shirtless. Puka Nacua was wearing a shirt.
I love it, man. That was pretty good. It's telling, right? Like, hey, he's still the man, and I acknowledge that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's is he worth wide receiver 6 dynasty startup prices, or is that too risky given like that Garrett Wilson and all these other, elite running backs will be on the board? Do you like his dynasty price? Do you think it's the right tag, even if you're not buying?
I think he's got a better argument for wide receiver 5 than Marvin Harrison Jr. does.
Wow. Okay. All right. That was not what I thought you were going to say. So you're in draft capital. Doesn't matter anymore. What happened. When
you prove yourself to be like elite, like he was like transcendent last year. Like let's not whitewash what happened.
Oh no, I'm no doubt on what happened. I'm just saying, like, he hasn't
receiver to come in to the league and think from just the start that you can match that. That's, to me, I think that's where people get overconfident on rookies, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and one of the things that we see is like a couple of things that are really important that I understand, that I believe about rookies based on all my research, is that the order of which that they go off within a round. Okay. Within a round. So if you're looking at first round wide receivers, right, the order they go off in that draft is not predictive of success. Okay. So
for wide receivers or all
for
players?
Wide receivers in round generally. Right.
Okay.
But like there's different tiers that open up.
Right. Look no further than Justin Jefferson, right?
Right. Justin Jefferson was the 4th wide receiver, and he was closer to 5 than 3 in his class of dynasty guys, right? So dynasty ADP nor the NFL draft pedigree is really predictive of initial success in the league from within a round. So that's largely random. So what that tells me is, like, we can like Marvin Harrison Jr., but the bet isn't Marvin Harrison Jr. It's Rome Odunze plus for Marvin Harrison Jr., right? Like, I don't know. I look at receivers. This is probably a moot point because I'm not, most likely in a super flex tight end premium league, I'm not drafting a receiver between 5 and 15 anyways. So we're talking about
why?
Because there's so many of them and they're not scarce. Why would I like again, we're having this conversation. Like, this is a great point. Like, what's the difference? Like, I like Puka Nacua at 6. Do I like him meaningfully more than Chris Olave at 33? Or, I mean, the difference between Rome Odunze and Marvin Harrison Jr.
Or
is 3
Jalen.
rounds in startup drafts. Yeah. Why on earth would I take Marvin Harrison Jr. as a 2nd round startup pick when I could take Rome Odunze in the 5th? Right? Like I wouldn't. So I just they're over and over and over again. Like those things pop up in that range. So I generally fade that range, but I think putting a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. ahead of someone that has proven to be, it's not an age thing, right? Like Puka Nacua is like not old. He's going into 20, year 2.
He's going to be 23 when the season starts. Marvin Harrison is like less than 18 months younger. I think it may be even less than a year younger.
Right. And we've learned a lot in the year, like the difference, like the jump from college to the NFL, we think we know, but again, historically, like it's not a sure thing. And there's stuff about Marvin Harrison Jr. that we don't know, right? We don't know why he didn't test, right? We don't know where the NFL thinks about that, right? As I sit here right now, he's the favorite to go as a wide receiver 1. I don't think that's a I don't think that's a lock. I mean, I've got Malik Neighbors futures to go 1.
You wouldn't put your paid for house up and bet on that, right? Like you wouldn't bet your life savings on Marvin going number 1. Yeah, I agree. I totally agree on that, right?
No, my bet is my bet in this draft class is him to go anywhere other than Arizona, right? Like I have futures on him to go anywhere other than Arizona because I just think the market is so certain on that's not priced right. So
yeah, but also with that is because your bet hits if somebody trades up to the 4th spot with Arizona to get JJ McCarthy or whoever QB4 is. Right. And then that means Marvin Harrison Jr. can go to pick 5, Chargers, pick 6, Giants, who would definitely take, a receiver. And then 7 is Tennessee. I mean, if the Chargers take a lineman, presumably Tennessee would just keep adding to weapons. So yeah, no, there's a couple outs, for that bet right there. I love that. So how do you do that? So you just place it anywhere there's like a yes or no anywhere but Arizona, or you just actually have to take he won't go to Arizona?
I've priced it out throughout the offseason. Like this has been a gradual process, but I've taken a bunch of different things. Like I have again, I think he's the most likely player to go wide receiver 1. Right. Like I think he's the most likely wide receiver 1, and the market agrees with that. But I do think that Malik Neighbors is probably underpriced to go wide receiver 1. And I think like if you look at Arizona, like Arizona at some point was like minus 250 to take Marvin Harrison Jr. They traded last year in the first 6 picks of the draft. They traded twice, right? They traded twice. They traded down and then they traded back up. So I just think for them to sit there at 4 and be like, no, we're taking a guy in a class that quarterback could be an option. But I don't think it's unreasonable to think that Marvin Harrison Jr. goes 3. Right. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing, right? Like if you're sitting there and it's your quarterback 3, or you have Marvin Harrison Jr. as a generational wide receiver, you should take Marvin Harrison Jr.
Or Bills Chiefs, like, hey, take our pick 30, whatever it is, 28, 32. Take our first next year, which is going to be late too. Let me move up there, right? Like, don't rule out one of those like super teams moving up for an elite wide receiver, and maybe it costs more than that. But I still think I
have one. I haven't been able to figure out how to place it yet because they don't have this market.
Yeah.
But for Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors or Dunze, but Jacksonville's interest in those top 3 wide receivers is interesting.
Yeah, and they're picking
because you can make that move. You can go 17-5. You can go 17-7. You can make those moves to sort of get. You can go 17-9 if the Bears want to trade out. Like you can make those are moves to make. And again, if you're looking for a wide receiver 1, the answer I think right now is either trade for Brandon Ayuk, which by the way Jacksonville's in the business of. That's been reported, or trade up to a top 10 pick and try and draft one, right? That's the 2 ways to get it. And it's expensive. I get it, but that's the cost of doing business for those receivers.
If Buffalo trades up, maybe with Jacksonville, if there's someone there that maybe they can give Gabe Davis back as part of the trade.
No, the Bills should be a trade down team.
Trade down. So you don't want them. Yeah.
No, I mean, take this is like a dynasty. Like, would you rather take wide receiver 6 in a class, or would you rather take wide receiver like like 9 and 13, right? Like I'm not going to roster a ton of those guys in Dynasty, but from an NFL perspective, like if you could trade down and grab another top 100 pick, like the Bills problem is that they have continuously traded up for non-premium, like non-difference makers. They traded up for Dalton Kincaid, who I really like, but it's a non-premium position. They traded for Kyer Elam and missed. They traded up for Tremont Edmonds, right, an off-ball linebacker. Like they have this fascination with trading up for non-premium positions, and then they actually are fairly successful on day 2 and 3, right? Like so they're trading all these picks that they're actually fairly good at to trade up for non-premium positions. It makes very little sense. Like they've actually done well. Like the Gabe Davis pick was profitable. Like all their picks in day 2 and 3, like have been fine. What their problem has been is that they've traded up in day 1 and not succeeded. And that hurts over the long term. Like that's the reason that they're
due. They're due. They're due for a hit.
Due, but stop doing dumb things in the process. You know what I mean? Like that's my take on it.
As we continue to talk about some of our rookie draft trade strategies, you mentioned trade up, trade down. Is there ever a situation where, well, explain the do's and don'ts of trading? So let's say you're sitting at the back end of your rookie dynasty draft. And by the way, we're always assuming Superflex, tight end premium, unless otherwise, spoken about here. You're sitting in the back. Is there ever a reason to trade up? And if so, what's the correct way to do it? And then we could talk about a little bit about the tactic of trading down. What's the do's and don'ts of that strategy within the first round of our drafts that are coming up?
So in my Dynasty team building guide, I actually have some trade rules. And these are things that have borne out over time. A lot of them are mistakes that I have made. Okay. So I think maybe the one that sort of strikes right at the heart of what you're talking about is never trade up in the first round of a rookie draft for a wide receiver.
Let me repeat that. Never trade up in the first round of a rookie draft for a rookie wide receiver. What if you're on the clock at 10 and just say A.D. Mitchell has gone to the Bills or the Chiefs? That's the hot,
that's a horrendous idea.
Right. Then you're saying don't trade up for Roma Dunze, who went 9 to the Bears.
Yeah. I mean, unless you're going to stop a tier break, but here's the problem with that. Like this class is going to have probably 5 or 6 first round wide receivers. And we're not going to again, in a draft, in an, ADP and draft order within a round hasn't been a predictive thing. Right. So I'd be very hesitant to trade up real assets to move up for a rookie wide receiver. Like that's almost always the wrong bet. Like there's a chance that there's a chance that it works, but it's a bad bet historically, right? So the only time you do it is when there's a clear tier break, right? Like the only time, and that usually historically has not been happening. And I don't know if it's going to happen in this class. It has not been in the first round of a rookie draft, right? Like even Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle fell out of the first round of rookie drafts. They were
Brandon Ayuk,
NFL draft.
Brandon Ayuk, another
Justin Jefferson, right? Like these stories are all the time, right? Like, and again, we get so locked in. We've spent 4 months, 5, 6 months, some people have done, right? Studying these players, and they're so certain. But when you just take a step back and look, that certainty has not gotten us far, right? Like, again, maybe the best trade I ever made was Jerry Jeudy to Justin Jefferson plus in a rookie draft. Right?
I was going to flex on you and give you one, but that one is way better. So, yeah I was going to tell you that I traded off Henry Ruggs to get to Brandon Ayuk. But
great. Those and do those things. That's the thing. And again, I think if you were joking about process before.
Yeah.
If you do that every time, you're going to be ahead. Right. And so I actually have stopped. I have a joke about there's a year where I want to know nothing about rookies, where all I want to know is the player's position, maybe their breakout age for wide receivers and where they went in the round they went in the NFL draft. And I want to know nothing else. And then I just want to go into rookie drafts and just arbitrage the profiles, right, without any knowledge. Because I think it would be a fascinating exercise. And I think that you could implement a lot of these strategies and be very, very successful in doing so by just not falling in love with players. So that's sort of my thought.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's hard to do because because listen, you can be an experienced dynasty player, but being disciplined like that, I mean, we fall in love with these, because like you said, we spend probably too much time studying them, so it's like we see the pretty girl side of all of them. We don't see the crazy side or the downside of anyone where we're too focused on them. So I mean, so how do you do it when a third of the year? You know what? Let's pause right there. We got a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about how to stay a little more disciplined, and I have a whole bunch of other questions for you. But first, everybody, I want to let you know about on-demand DFS. Jordan, if you haven't heard of this, it's pretty cool. Think back to the golden days of fantasy football, when it was all about the love of the game, the camaraderie, yes, the bragging rights. Well, friends at on-demand DFS are bringing back those days with their revolutionary app that's changing the game of fantasy forever. Gone are the days of confusing entry fees, playing against unknown masses, juggling multiple apps to trash talk with your league mates. On-demand DFS is here to streamline your fantasy football experience, making it more about strategy, fun, and, of course, community. With on-demand DFS, you can create contests in seconds, invite your friends, and you're off to the races. No entry fees, no gimmicks, just pure fantasy football bliss. And here's the kicker, Jordan. You're not limited to the current season of players. Imagine creating your dream lineup from over 5,000 NFL legends and today's stars using real historical data to simulate the action. For those who hate to wait, you'll love turbo mode. Contests wrap up in minutes, not hours, keeping the excitement going all day long. Download the on-demand DFS app now and get started with 30-day free trial. Dive into fantasy football experience that's rich with rich history, strategy, and most importantly, fun. It's time to create your legacy with the ultimate lineup of legends. Live out your fantasy football dreams like never before. There is a link in the video description or audio description if you're listening. And I like the idea, Jordan, of all-time, using anybody. Who would be your all-time fantasy quarterback? You get, we're just building a not a dynasty, but a lineup for one season. Who's your all-time fantasy quarterback?
That's a good question. There's some Mike Vick years that were pretty interesting.
The year before everyone picked him number one overall in the draft.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I don't know. Josh Allen's a good bet, right? Like some of the Josh Allen stuff's a good bet.
How about running back? Who would be your all-time fantasy running back?
Either Marshall Faulk or Daniel Tomlinson.
Yeah, that's the pick. All right. So far, you've passed the test. All right. Wide receiver. Who's going to be your fantasy wide receiver?
Can I take the Randy Moss of the Tom Brady era?
Ooh, not the rookie season one, but
that's
Tom
good
Brady.
Too. Yeah, no, that's good too. Yeah.
Yep. And the reason why I say the rookie one's better is because he's going to be priced cheaper because it was unexpected, right? You're going to get him in the last round of your draft. Yeah. How about tight end? I think this one's a little obvious, but who's going to be your all-time dynasty fantasy tight end?
Gronk or Kelsey?
Yeah. You've passed the test, Jordan.
Like what's it? The 20. Well, Gronk was drafted in, I think 2010, 2011 season was probably. I think it was either whatever his second season was. That's arguably that and the Kelsey year from 2020. Like those are the two great.
He was drafted in 10.
Yes, that 11 season was real stuff in that Rob Gronkowski arc.
Yep. So I'm trying. What do you think some of the wrong answers would be in the sense where like people think they were a good all-time fantasy quarterback? Not that they weren't good, but would who was like a little bit of an overrated fantasy quarterback? Someone that gets credit, but
Justin Fields.
Oh, too soon. Let's talk about Fields for a second here. Are you?
Oh God, you're threatening to break this. I'm going to end up in the Dynasty Hague. The last time I talked about Justin Fields. Oh boy.
Well, here's my comparison. If the down, so it sounds like you're a downside of Justin Fields guy. Doesn't this seem eerily similar to when Jameis Winston went from being a starter to a backup? Like how? Because remember, everyone's like Jameis Winston. He had his 30+ touchdown season, and then you were buying him because he was a free agent or he was cut, and then he ends up as a backup, same thing as Justin Fields, and then he just never returns to starter status again. Is there any parallel here that we can learn a lesson from?
How many teams passed on trading for him?
For nothing. The Jets could have used him.
By the way, New England paid more for Jacoby Brissett than Justin Fields. And by the way, you can say all you want that, they had to trade for him. If the New England Patriots thought that Justin Fields was a legitimate guy, They would have spent a day 3 pick to check him out for a year, right? Like, stop already with some of that stuff. So the NFL has told us what they think. And by the way, it's a really good reminder that when you get people that are like, oh, look, he's a great runner, right? You can't sustain in the NFL as a running quarterback, right? He was really good at the stuff that you can't sustain, and he was not good at the stuff that you need to sustain, right? Which was being a quarterback, right? Being a passer, right? Being able to not take sacks, right? Like those things that are really predictive of future success, he was very bad at. And I spent 18 months trying to tell people that, then they still spent first-round rookie picks on him or first-round startup picks on him. I saw someone rank him in the top 10 of quarterbacks like in February of this year, right? I
did a startup in March before he got cut, and he went in the end of round 2.
I can probably tell you who drafted him.
So do you think? So all right. You would obviously, if someone offered you a rookie pick 201, you're doing that. You're getting rid of Justin Fields. He's on your roster for some reason.
I mean, there's still people that are putting him in deals and getting Josh Allen, which I can't.
I haven't seen that.
I can't. I saw it yesterday. Okay. I can't tell you how that happens. Right? Like, I can't tell you that process. I don't. It's totally foreign to me.
Yeah, I'm trying to unload him. I offered him to somebody for Goff. They said no. But someone offered me something of value, and I regretted not taking it. But so I'm saying rookie pick 201. You would, if I said, "Hey, Jordan, I'll give you rookie pick 201 this year for Fields," you would let him go in a super flex?
I'd probably shoot higher than that. I mean, Justin Fields 106, a 2025 first, and Brandon Ayuk for Josh Allen. I would do that.
I mean, that's obvious. Yeah, that's an obvious match. But I'm saying,
like Justin Fields in 104 for Anthony Richardson. Right. Like I think that there's more than just trading him for a future second out there for you. You can do that. But I think that if you think hard enough and kind of look hard enough, there's deals out there that you can, that people are still making, right? There's people that are still making this, that still believe.
What if I have 110? That person. Let's say I have 110 in Justin Fields.
I'd take 110.
No, I'm saying no. If so, what I'm thinking now, because now this is completely selfish. I'm using you as a private session here. So let's say I have rookie pick 110. So that's outside right now of the perceived like usable tier, right? That's like you're not even going to get RB1. You're probably not going to get McCarthy. You might get Michael Penix or Bo Nix, whoever your flavor is, or wide receiver 6. So I have rookie pick 110 and I have Fields. What do you think that can get me to?
So I look at this and I think like, okay, what does 110 in Justin Fields kind of represent? Like
Michael Penix or A.D. Mitchell or
right.
Brian
It represents an option for someone to try and rebuild, right? Or kind of, I can go the long game. Yeah, I can build for the future. Like in 3 years, Justin Fields is going to develop into this guy, right? Like that's the story you're pitching to somebody. So you kind of need a foil for that, right? So I would look at like, does that get me in the Dak Prescott business? It shouldn't, but it might. Right? Can it get me into that business? Would be kind of the way that I would think about that. And my position is like we talked about before, I spend my entire offseason trying to think about how I can get elite players. Like if Justin Fields is a piece where it's like 110 and I got to add stuff to it to get a top 10 quarterback, I'm fine doing so. Right. If someone wants to take that bet, I'm willing to put a backup quarterback in a deal with future picks to get a good quarterback, right? That should be a trade that we're willing to do. And, the NFL has told us, what they think about Justin Fields, right? Yeah. And I think that is the
bold case for him is that Russell Wilson is kind of a cast off at this point himself, right? And I mean, I'm not saying this is true, like he's not good or anything. Just saying like this is the story that dynasty players will tell themselves. Russell Wilson's time is limited. He's an older quarterback. He's now been, hot potato passed off on 2 different teams. So of course, when the Steelers are 4-4, Justin Fields is going to get his chance. Again, I'm talking as the straw man sort of dynasty player that sees the upside. And when Justin Fields takes over in week 7 and week 8, this is when he's going to go nuclear. I mean, that is something that you can get yourself to, whether it's, happens or not is another thing. So yeah, I guess you're right. There is a market there. I'm definitely stuck with a few Justin Fields share, but I'm too scared to trade him, Jordan, and I'm too scared to buy him. So it's kind of like a wait and see market for him.
Can I tell you the thing I'm most excited about for the 2024 season is for the George Pickens people and the Justin Fields people to turn on each other instead of turn on me. I want them to turn on each other, them to fight each other. That's what I'm hoping for, instead of them arguing with me. Okay? I want them to, because I'm going to sit back and laugh.
Are you more optimistic with Pickens if with Russell Wilson? I'm assuming, just doesn't mean he'll be a superstar, but he could be Cortland Sutton.
Sure. He's one that I haven't studied him enough this year. Every year there's like 4 or 5 players and 4 or 5 things that lead me down a rabbit hole of researching that I'm interested in that come to new conclusions. The thing that it's really interesting because George Pickens last year didn't change substantially from what he was in his rookie season, except in one key and critical factor. He did a ton more after the catch. Not much else changed, but his yards after the catch tripled. And by the way, he wasn't that guy in college either. Like, this is by far in his like post high school career, the best he's ever done after the catch. And so I look at that and I say, well, what happened? Right. And there's really like 2 explanations for it. Right. One is he got better. Right. That he's better at that skill. And I think the way that you would kind of go to measure and confirm that is, did he break tackles more frequently? Right. Because if you're getting yards after the catch, right, and you're tripling that number, that should be supported by some other metric, like you're breaking tackles a lot more frequently. That's not the case. His broken tackle rate has not improved. And so I come back and I look at that, and there's like 2 or 3 catches that went for like 80 yards last year on Pickens that it kind of felt a little bit, it's a different player, but it felt Jamar Chase rookie season-ish.
Little fugazi.
He broke these big numbers, and now it was so much yardage without, and again, it was just like busted coverage stuff. Like he had a couple of long touchdowns that were just like busted coverage stuff on like 10-yard slants, which good for him. He converted them, but I don't know how predictable that is. So that's the thing that, like, I just think when you see a player change like that drastically, that's it, going kind of harkening back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show. That's one of those situations where I wouldn't buy that high. Yeah. I don't think that's a truly sustainably different performance.
We're going to take a short break for the audio audience, but stick with us, YouTube audience. We're going to keep going. And when we come back, I want to ask Jordan about a couple rookie draft strategies, including quarterback versus wide receiver 1 in the draft class, and how do you parse that out? Okay, we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, we are back on the RotoWire Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast. Alan Seslowsky along with Jordan McNamara. You follow him as I do at McNamara Dynasty. And Jordan, people want to see what you're doing over there. I highly recommend your podcast, The Dynasty Think Tank, along with going to check out the analytics of dynasty.com, where you have all your content, a lot of strategy stuff. Jordan knows I'm a big fan, and I think that you are one of the people that I think is doing Dynasty in just like a different level of it, thinking about it, not just with player takes, but you know what? I'm going to let you, what's the elevator pitch to someone that why they should come over to the analytics of Dynasty and check you out?
I think your decision should reflect a strategy, not just trying to pick players. And so we do a ton of strategy, right? And it's very different. Like you asked earlier, how we avoid some of the pitfalls of rookie drafts. I don't start rookie draft season in terms of coverage. And by the way, I do 360 podcasts a year for AOD. It's a daily podcast stream all year. And then I basically handle 8 in season, right? So from Martin Luther King Day to Labor Day, I do a podcast every day. And then I do, I think, 7 or 8 in season. So it's a lot of podcasts. I don't start covering rookies until April. And that is how I avoid some of these problems.
Yeah.
Right. So that's different. Right. So a lot of the things that I do are different. They're strategic. and they're meant to go at just different things that I see in terms of different efficiencies and that sort of stuff. So it's a very I think AOD tends to be we try and think strategically, and we do think differently. And we're there every day. Right. So that's the kind of the triad of things that we do. There's a lot more to it than that, obviously.
Yep.
We have a trade database, but you're going to get me every day. And thinking about just different things. And it's probably going to be different than the conversations you hear in your normal Dynasty podcasts.
I could attest to that. And also right now, if you want to check out RotoWire, go to rotowire.com/pod, rotowire.com/pod. We're going to let you check out behind the paywall for 2 days free. No credit card, just put your email in, paywall unlocks after 2 days. If you want to subscribe, great. If not, it just lapses, rotowire.com/pod. All right, back to our tricks that you can do or tactics you could deploy during your rookie draft, Jordan. Okay, I think that any super flex drafter is probably going to take Caleb Williams at 1.1. I mean, there'll be some where it's different, but let's assume your average draft takes him. You're on the clock at pick 2, Jordan. Are you taking wide receiver 1 or you're taking quarterback 2 in your rankings? Let's say that team context wise, you could use either. We know what kind of value that is in our dynasty leagues, but man, resisting wide receiver 1, how do you parse that out for people? Or is it this as a general rule?
If I have 102, I'm doing everything in my power to trade for an elite player. Everything in my power.
Amon-Ra St. Brown, you're taking him.
Yeah, or even like a quarterback. Right? Like I've spent this offseason in one league trying to get a quarterback. And the best route that I could do was to try and get as high as I could in a rookie draft. So that way I can put a package together to try and land.
Give me an example. 102.
Like I have 102, I've got 112, and I've got a future first. When the CJ Stroud news happened that Diggs was going to go to Houston, my first inclination was how close does that get me to Josh Allen? The problem is that I have Josh Allen. So so it didn't work for me in that, but I think other situations like that present themselves, right? If that happened to Patrick Mahomes, for example, right? Like that would be a business that I would be in. I don't think I would give or have to give all of that for Justin Herbert, but that's another example, right? Like I want a proven high level quarterback. If I am picking at 102 and I don't have one on my team, that's what I am looking for. I think rookie draft picks are the means to the end. And some people use them as just being the end, right? Some people just want to draft rookies and be in that business. You're given rookie picks in the reverse order of which you finished, right? So if you're bad, you're given a high one, and you should use that to make your team better, not make your team the purpose of just accumulating rookie picks, right? So that's kind of my take on that. So I would be star hunting. I'd spend if I had 102 from January, I would have spent my entire offseason for that team thinking about what I'm going to do to try and make that trade and make trades, right? Spend a day shooting Mahomes offers, spend a day shooting Lamar Jackson offers, like work that, but that's the business you should be in.
I bet you that 102, because I don't know if Lamar, I agree with you, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, even CJ Stroud at this point, considered elite tier. There are still Lamar Jackson dynasty owners that would get off him. I think that he's like without news of like some sort of burning building. He's the guy, and Justin Herbert for sure. He went in the second round of a recent dynasty startup that I was observing. He is no longer considered, like he's almost like, all right, I'll take him. He's like the end of the safe starters, but he is from going from pick 2, which he was probably a little overvalued in Superflex Dynasty, to now, pick 15 overall or something like that. I mean, are you nervous about the change in philosophy with the Chargers, or perceived change in philosophy with Justin Herbert, or no, he's still elite?
He's still, it's funny because I think the mistake we probably made was that he was never elite. Right? People put him at 3, and the answer to that was probably, well, I'd rather take at a discount 6, 7, or 8. And now he's, instead of being 3, he's in like the 6, 7, and 8 business, right? Like I think he's a really good example of you don't prioritize within a tier, right? And like, so I think he's a good example of that. So
he's 8 right now. Caleb Williams going ahead of him.
Right. I mean, the odds that Caleb Williams, so like the easiest way to think about this is a quarterback with multiple hits on their resume is substantially, by the way, one hit on your resume is substantially more likely to produce than a quarterback without any hits at the same ADP, right? So if you have two quarterbacks that are going right next to each other, the one with a prior history of success in the NFL as a fantasy scorer, substantially more likely to do it. When you get to two, right, when you get to multiple times producing at a top 12 level, your odds go up drastically. Okay. So the idea of putting an incoming rookie ahead of Justin Herbert is a wild decision, right? Just numerically. And the reason that people do it is age insulation. And that should tell you all you need to know about how overvaluing people are on age versus production.
But 1.01 is a special kind of insulation too. I mean, if a player was picked at pick 10 and had Bryce Young season, like Carolina would already be plotting how to get out. But because he's the 101, and this insulation is specifically reserved for 101, you have to be Bryce Young bad for probably 3 years before they let you out, before they give up on you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. By the way, how many drafts do you think, what percentage of drafts do you think that Caleb Williams goes number one?
Assuming that he goes 1 to the Bears and that Jaden Daniels, let's say, goes 2 to Washington.
Yeah, and Marvin Harrison Jr. is a top 5 pick.
Right. And to a team we love, to the Herbert team, right? To Chargers, something like that. I would say that it's probably 90 plus, meaning that there'll be teams that think like, oh, Jamar Chase was a better pick than Trevor Lawrence. And I already have 3 quarterbacks. And I can't trade back. So I would say out of every 100 drafts, I would say 90 of them, and I might be too low, Caleb Williams will go 1. What do you think?
I think it's going to be less than that.
You think 75?
I mean, they're real close to each other at fantasy calc and a keep trade cut. Again, those are imperfect measures, but they're close enough that I think that, and I've heard people talk about, about Marvin Harrison Jr. as the number 1 pick in rookie drafts. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be like, I would be hesitant, I think, to make the trade at 2 right now in the league and the situation we were just talking about, because I think there's a non-zero chance that it's actually Caleb Williams that's available to me at 2.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And if that happens, that changes the calculus on what that trade is, right? Because then, right, if I make the Mahomes offer, right? If I make them a Mahomes offer and the person's like, I'm not going to get a quarterback there. If all of a sudden they're going to get a quarterback there, right? That's a meeting of the minds that all of a sudden I think becomes available to us.
Right. And cheaper too, right? Marvin Harrison, whatever the plus is to get the Mahomes, is a lot more expensive than the Caleb Williams and the plus. This Caleb Williams and my first next year probably gets it done.
Right. And people don't it's almost impossible to make a trade for an elite quarterback without giving one. Right. So I think a lot of times when I look at those deals, I think maybe the mistake that people do is draft for need. I think the caveat to that is if you're in the business, right? If my goal is to get an elite quarterback, I'm much more likely to get one by drafting a guy. And it's not even that the guy is going to be like if I'm sitting at 108, for example, okay, and JJ McCarthy's there, or it's, I don't know, Jonathan Brooks or whoever the running back one is.
RB1 right? Versus QB4.
Right. Perfect. If I am sitting there at 4 and I'm like, I need quarterback, I'm taking McCarthy, and I'm not taking him because I think McCarthy's the answer to my quarterback solution, right? I'm taking him because I think McCarthy's the answer to the asset in a trade that gets me my quarterback solution, right?
McCarthy gets you to Jordan Love or something like that. And then Jordan Love gets you to the next one.
And if you think that's crazy, let me go back and present to you trades that were made with Mac Jones and rookie drafts in his rookie season, because we could do an entire catalog of those about how if you had just stayed and picked him, you had a ticket to
pick 9.
Right. People love themselves some young quarterbacks. Love it. And that's usually it's not a good bet. Right. So gladly take them when they're cheap in rookie drafts and then sell them for guys that, are quote old at 28 years old.
Yeah. Here's another little Dynasty adage, and I'm sure it's somewhere in the analytics of Dynasty book or the website, is that quarterbacks are cheapest to buy in startups and in rookie drafts, and they're most expensive when you trade for them. So,
yes.
Yeah.
It's a scarcity thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's a market thing. And so, take. It's hard to pass on a premium position in Superflex and tight end premium for a receiver. Like, I think as you start doing it more and more, and as you start playing and you get the reps, like, it becomes very, very difficult to pass on those positions for receivers. That's the lesson that I've learned.
Jordan, you did it again, baby. You did it again. I appreciate your time. I know you're busy, but you always make time for us over here at RotoWire Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast. You're always a crowd favorite. You're always one of my favorites. You know that. And I enjoy talking with you. So want everyone to go check out Jordan. You should follow him as I do at McNamara Dynasty. All his links to his content, everything will be linked in the video description below. And we'll be back next week with another Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast. If you're in the comments, let us know a few of the tricks or tactics you deploy in your Dynasty rookie drafts.